Hello kids, welcome to video 2, Road Signs to Transitions, Time Transition Words. Remember, this is a set of 4 videos and you must watch them in consecutive order 1, 2, 3, and 4 because each video builds on the one before. Please remember to make sure that you have paper and pencil to go along with our video. In our previous video, we talked about different road signs. We also looked at some transition words. Here is a brief overview of the transition words that we looked at. The first is meanwhile, as soon as, and shortly after that. Meanwhile, the students were all reading their vocabulary practice sheets because as soon as the teacher finished marking attendance, the vocabulary test would begin. At that very moment, soon, and before long. Before long, all of the animals returned to the burned out forest, and soon they would begin to remake their homes. Immediately, later the same day, at last. Later the same day, I returned the overdue library books. And the last, I had cleared out my room of all library books and I was free of debt. Earlier, not a moment too soon, an hour later. An hour later, I was finished practicing my piano lesson, and not a moment too soon, because my best friend Alice called to invite me to a movie. During all of this, along the way, without delay. Along the way, I noticed there was poison ivy on the trail, and without delay, I carefully took a shower when I arrived home. As you can see, writers can use transition words in different places in the sentences. Let's look at 2 simple sentences and then use some of the same time transition words we learned about to combine the sentences in different ways. Sam and Max rode their bikes. Jack went home. We can use the transition words earlier in the day and as soon as to combine these 2 sentences into one. Earlier in the day, comma, Sam and Max rode their bikes as soon as Jack went home, period. We've taken 2 simple sentences, Sam and Max rode their bikes, Jack went home. We've added transitional phrases and we've made one long sentence that helps to paint a picture of what happened during the day with Sam and Max and Jack. Now, let's see if we can use some different transition words using the same 2 sentences and writing a different sentence. Sam and Max rode their bikes. Jack went home. If you look, we used the transition words earlier in the day, as soon as Jack went home. Earlier in the day, Sam and Max rode their bikes as soon as Jack went home. Now we're going to use the transition words and an hour later. Sam and Max rode their bikes and an hour later, comma, Jack went home. Here's another sentence combining the 2 sentences. Sam and Max rode their bikes. Jack went home. Shortly after that, Jack went home. And eventually, Sam and Max rode their bikes. All right, look at this sentence and talk with your families and see if you can decide what the transitional words were that we used. I've highlighted the transitional word phrases that we used in red. Shortly after that, comma, Jack went home, comma, and eventually Sam and Max rode their bikes. The transitional phrase that we used was shortly after that, and then we added and eventually. to our transitional phrases and words that we used in our sentences. Here is another sentence you can try. Our two sentences were, Sam and Max rode their bikes, Jack went home. We combine these sentences with, Sam and Max rode their bikes, comma, meanwhile, comma, Jack went home. The word highlighted in red is the word that you should have identified as the transitional word added to the sentence. Meanwhile, to combine our two sentences into one meaningful sentence. Here is one last example to try with our two sentences. Sam and Max rode their bikes. Jack went home. The combined sentences, later that same day, Sam and Max rode their bikes, and at last Jack went home. Take a moment and decide what the transitional words and phrases were that we added to the sentence to combine the two sentences into one. All right, let's check your work. Here, highlighted in red, are the transitional phrases that were used to combine our two sentences. Sam and Max rode their bikes. Jack went home. Later that same day, Sam and Max rode their bikes, and at last Jack went home. So see, we combined our sentences in 5 different ways using different transitional words and phrases. I'm sure you can come up with several others. Use your paper and pencil to write down the two sentences and see if you can come up with some different transitional words and phrases to combine the two sentences into one meaningful sentence. That's the end of our video for today. Hope you can come back, and I'll see you again with video 3.